the bottom dropped out of my world. You know, even sex before marriage was frowned upon, never mind something like this. I actually felt sick, physically sick. I had become a horrendous, dirty secret. That day changed the whole of the rest of my life. I could never tell anybody this. And my childhood was a very happy one. I didn't come to my parents until I was 2.5 going on 3. They already had 2 boys older than me. In those days, people weren't really told much about their background to the children they were adopting. I think all my parents knew was that I had an Irish mother who was unmarried and therefore couldn't look after me and had given me up for adoption straight away. So I was in my early 20s when I decided I would like to find out more about my biological background. I secretly decided to find out how I would go about this. And that's really where the story began. So to begin with, I read that my mum, as I knew, was an unmarried mother. She was only 16 and therefore had not been in a position to bring me up. And as I read further down the page, it started to give details of other people, including that of my father. And as I read further down, I read that my father was my mother's brother and was 14 at the time that I had been conceived. And the bottom dropped out of my world. I'd been brought up in a Catholic, very prim and proper way, and all of a sudden I had become a horrendous, dirty secret. And I actually felt sick, physically sick, as I was reading it, because it was beyond anything I had expected to read. I felt like I could never tell anybody this. I just felt just horrible. I felt unworthy. I felt like if they knew, they would never have adopted me. That if I told anybody and my siblings found out, they would not want to have anything to do with me. And I just felt dirty. It was just horrible. It's very hard to explain how big a shame and embarrassment came about as a result of the information I'd found. Because of the way I'd been brought up, you know, even sex before marriage was frowned upon, never mind something like this that was incest at the end of the day. This was something that I needed to keep to myself and never tell anybody. The biggest thing as a result of it, I think, is that I decided if I have children, something terrible is going to happen to them, or they will have some disability, and that will be my fault because I knew. And so, having wanted children so badly, I decided that I simply couldn't have them. I couldn't take that risk. And so that day changed the whole of the rest of my life. And from then on in my adult life, if ever a relationship got too far that we were starting to be serious or starting to have those conversations, I had to get out of it. So I threw myself into being an auntie because that was going to be the next best thing, and built very good relationships with all my nieces and nephews. And that was my compensation, that if I couldn't be a mum, I'd be the best auntie. It was very hard carrying such a big secret for so long, because everyone around me was, well, don't you want children? Aren't you thinking about settling down? And I would have to keep finding excuses and, or I just haven't found the right guy yet, or, you know, whatever I could think at the time would get me out of the situation. So it definitely affected my mental health. So after a couple of years, I started to think, actually, maybe I should meet my mum and try and see things from her point of view, see what had happened. There was a register that you could put your name on to say that you were looking for your parent, and that by the same token there was a register for parents who were looking for children. And it wasn't long before I was contacted by the social services and I was given a number to go to. And so again, secretly, I told nobody. When she opened the door, the first thing that knocked me sideways, and people who are in their own biological families may not appreciate this, but I had spent all my life not looking like anybody else. So I was quite taken aback by that. And so she was quite distant and I was quite cold and angry. So it wasn't the greatest of atmospheres as I went in. And there, sitting in the corner in a chair, was somebody else that looked like me, a gentleman, whom she introduced as, "This is my friend who's come with me to support me today." But clearly that's not who he was. I am 100% certain that was my father, her brother. And that made me even more angry because I felt like she was not telling me the truth already. I started firing all sorts of questions at her and quite angry, this is your fault, do you know what you've done? We weren't there for very long before she said to me, "Look, I think the best thing is you're obviously very upset and we're not getting very far. Why don't I give you a phone number? You go away, write down what you want to ask me so that we can have a bit more of a conversation. Ring me when you've got your questions and then we'll meet again." So I agreed to that and I left. The only thing I came away with in terms of any answers was that if they were still speaking to each other and still quite at ease with each other as they seemed to be in the room, that sort of made me think that it probably wasn't an assault, that, she hadn't been raped. A few weeks later, I rang the number to arrange to go and meet again and properly get some answers, and the number was dead. I went through the operator and she said, no, the line wasn't connected. I went back to the flat. There was nobody there, and the people in the flats around it didn't know anything about the tenants, didn't know where they'd come from or where they'd gone to. I'd just been rejected for the second time. And all that did was crash back all my feelings again about how unloving, unworthy and useless, and how nobody wanted me. And here I was again, she'd got a chance for the second time, and she didn't want me as a grown-up. I started to think, why had they done that? Why would you do that? And a bit of me thinks, and still does now, is that all they wanted to do was to come back and just check that I was okay and that maybe they'd made the right decision because I'd been brought up in a family and had obviously been brought up well, I'd been educated. They got what they wanted, which was almost a confirmation that they'd done the right thing. But for me, that was just worse than not meeting them, not knowing anything. Here I was again, stuck on my own, with a great big secret, and I just got to carry on life without them, and it was all their fault again. Oh God, I can't tell you how good it was to tell somebody. I had spent so long thinking I can never tell anybody, and I also felt that my parents should know, having known nothing about my background. They were actually really quite upset, not because of anything I said, but because I had had to carry that on my own for so long. They were just so upset that I would think I couldn't tell them, or that I would think it would change anything, that they loved me for me. I'm really pleased I told my parents in time, because they were quite elderly, and it means that when they did pass, I knew that we were okay. They knew the full story and we were still okay.